Laptop is on.
I like the oh fuck thing.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Sandile Gidi. Welcome to another exciting edition of the book launch. It's exciting. It's a Monday. Hopefully, it's not a blue Monday for most people. We're at the seminar room here at HUMA, Institute for Humanities in Africa. Thanks again to the director of HUMA, Divine Fu, for allowing us this wonderful space. And of course, the University of Cape Town, who make this possible, and several of our funders, of course, who make us manage to do the many things that we do, or at least try to do. This afternoon, we've got a special guest, Anaïs Ménard from the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Germany. Am I right? She's on my immediate right. And the discussant this afternoon is Dominic Somder, a researcher here at HUMA. She has had several postdoctoral fellowships. She is a dear friend, a wonderful scholar, and you'll see as this gathering continues that there are so many connections in the scholarship of our guest speaker, Anaïs Ménard, and Dominic Somder, our discussant. So without further ado, let me introduce the topic of the day. It's a book integrating strangers, Sherbro identity, and the politics of reciprocity along the Sierra Leonean Coast. This is a work in ethnographic study that comes from a deep place of passion, connection with the place, Sierra Leone, that Anaïs Ménard has dedicated herself studying, understanding, picking up the best she could from the people, from the history, the various genealogical and political, layers of the place, the entanglements of history, coloniality, identity formation, what it means to belong to an ethnic group. What does ethnicity mean to the people of Sierra Leone, particularly the group that she studies, which is the Sherbro ethnic group or identity group, because as her work shows us, ethnicity or ethnic formations really results from various constructions, from various agencies. Reciprocal agency features a lot in this work. But hey, who am I to say everything about this work? Let me not waste your time, ladies and gentlemen. Let me hand it over to Anaïs Ménard, who came with her family here. Where are you? Where are they? But anyway, we'll see them later. But they're not in Cape Town. But thank you so much. Over to you, Anaïs, and then after that, Dominic will take over. Thank you and welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for organizing this and for the discussion that will take place afterwards. So I'll speak for about 25, 30 minutes. So keep the time in case I'm late. So I'm happy today to present this book. I actually prefer standing, if you don't mind. So I hope that the people on the screen can see me, but I think they can.
Yes, yeah, they can. Okay.
Right, so this book is about processes of identity making in a context that is prone to social conflict, in which actually autochthony and discourses of autochthony have gained a momentum in this precise region where I have been working. So this region is situated around the capital, Freetown. You can see it on the picture of the book. So it's a chain of mountains south of the capital. And so I've worked in a collection of coastal towns in which people mostly live on fishing. So it's an area that is a rural area, but it has become, over years and over the 2 decades after the Civil War, so the Civil War ended in 2002, it has become a kind of extension of the city and of Freetown because of the construction activities, because of the deforestation process and the construction of the road. So you can see here how the landscape has changed, so the stone quarry and real estate investment in the region. But people still live mostly on fishing, charcoal production, so really rural activities on a daily basis. Now, this literature in Sierra Leone, mostly, let's say since 2005, 2006, has been dominated by conflict and post-conflict literature. So discourses and narratives on violence, instability, the restructuring of the state. And this was a bias I wanted to avoid, especially that when I came to this region, I realized that people were totally uninterested in talking about the Civil War. Their interest lied elsewhere, their concerns lied elsewhere, and they were more concerned with this, the emergence of this kind of multicultural, multilingual new dynamics in the region due to population movement. So how to live together, how to make a living of all these people coming together in one region. So this is why I decided to look at processes of identity making. And I looked at it in a long-term perspective, despite the fact that those relations were being reconfigured very quickly, there were long-term processes to look at. So among the short-term processes, there was a massive population displacement during the Civil War from the internal regions to the coast, which was followed by economic migration after the war. This means that, so you can see boats in Tombo here, so fishing harbors like Tombo, Godrich, Toke counted about a few hundred inhabitants before the war, and in the decade that followed, it grew to 20,000 inhabitants plus. So, of course, it created problems of access to land, housing, jobs, etc., and a lot of people involving in fishing more and more. And of course, this acceleration of economic migration created tensions with people who considered themselves as autochthonous to the region, Sherbro people, because they experienced these changes as a loss of control, right? And this is usually what autochthony is about, a loss of control of local politics, of main assets such as land. And it took a kind of political tone as well, in the sense that migration from Tini-speaking regions were encouraged by the APC government that ruled between 2008 and 2018. So about 10 years of large-scale movement from Tini-speaking regions. And therefore, Sherbro populations align tightly with the other party, the SLPP, the Sierra Leone People's Congress. So you can see also how ethnic politics came to reconfigure the region. And the discourse of autochthony that grew in these years was an anti-Timi discourse. It was mainly targeted at Timi-speaking populations who were migrating to work in fishing. Now, even discourses of autochthony are entangled in a historicity of relationships. In this case, Timi and Sherbro populations have been fishing alongside for at least the early 20th century. Many Sherbro populations speak Timni, or at least understand Timni. They have interacted by way of marriage, by initiation societies, so the kind of cultural and social processes that allow people to live together. So it's very common to have like people who have various Sherbro Timni ancestry. So it meant that, I mean, these discourses of autochthony meant that something in those relationships had been broken, right, in some way. And another part of the general discourse or public discourse of Sherbro populations interested me, which was the fact that they not only claim Sherbro identity, but also Creole identity. Sentences such as the Sherbros are Creole, the Creoles are Sherbro, they have the same background, they are the same people. And in order to understand this, we have to get back a bit in history. Because as you may know, the colony of Sierra Leone, which was originally the province of Freedom, was established at the end of the 19th century, following which, after the abolition of the slave trade, the slave ships that were stopped in British waters, so the British authorities basically stopped the slave ships that were crossing the British waters to cross the Atlantic, and the slaves were landed in Sierra Leone. And this population was called the liberated Africans. So this meant that by the mid-19th century, in the colony of Freetown, you had about 40,000 people who were of liberated African descent. So people coming from present-day countries such as Nigeria, Cameroon, Congo, etc. So people who had various linguistic and cultural backgrounds, and among whom cultural mixing led to the emergence of the Creole culture, Creole population, and language. So this is what people understand when they use the term Creole today. We are talking about descendants of people who are descendants of the liberated Africans. So when the liberated Africans were landed in the colony of Sierra Leone, they established settlements not only in Freetown, but along the coast. And that's how they came in close contact with Sherbro populations. It's recorded in the archives, but interestingly, when comparing archives with oral traditions in this region, it concords beautifully in the sense that people in some settlements have recorded the arrival of the slaves. So in oral tradition, they call them the slaves, but it's the liberated Africans. So oral traditions talk about the slave asking for land to the Sherbro people and land being given to them. So, so this long-term relationship is acknowledged, and it's even like in the landscape, because in some of the settlements you have a Sherbro town and a Creole town. So this history is very much ingrained in the landscape. I talked here about the different dynamics, right? Historical dynamics in the region. Now I will try to explain to you how I have looked at those dynamics, how I've tried to analyze them, and mostly I've been using linguistic theory, and I've been approaching ethnic identity as a linguistic performance. The reason for this is that I realize that people can hold multiple identities, and most importantly, there are bridges and possibilities for switches that are part of the Sherbro family and social organization that are considered legitimate. They have social legitimacy, if you wish. And in order to be a bit more specific and for you to understand how this works, I've taken an example that I take in the introduction so that it gives some more flesh to what I'm saying. So I take the example of Mr. George Nicol, who died in 2020, who was one of my main contacts in Sierra Leone, and with whom I spent a lot of time talking under his porch, seeing how people come and with like which concerns they come to him, etc. And I tried to break down for you his various names so that you have an idea of what family backgrounds mean in this context. So he was called George Charles Kegbindi P.H. Nicol. Nicol is his last name, but it was acquired by his great-grandfather, who was Mende and who migrated to Freetown and who was raised by a Creole family. So that's how he acquired a kind of British-sounding name, Nicol. So it was the first Mr. Nicol, the great-grandfather. Now, Charles was his baptism name. George was a name he acquired because he saved a British resident from drowning. And so the British resident decided to pay for his schooling and rebaptize him, and that's how he acquired George. Now, Kegbindi was a name given by his father, which is a Mende name, which means I see the nights. But Mr. Nicol's father and Mr. Nicol didn't speak to him, Mende, sorry. It was a name that acknowledged their Mende roots that date back to 3 generations, but they themselves did not speak Mende. Now he got the name PF, which was his initiation name, which is the Sherbro version of the Initiation Society Borough. So that's his initiation society name. And then Chemideif is a nickname he got when he performed at one of the initiation society performances, but not in his settlements, but in his mother's settlement, which is Timni Sherbro. So he sang in Timni, a song in which a sentence says Chemideif. We can talk about the meaning later, but it became his nickname in this specific village to acknowledge also his roots as somebody who has Timni ancestry. It's a bit complex, but it gives you a picture of how complex it can be, actually. Now, on his paternal side, he inherited land from the Lee family, which is Sherbro Creole family, or he would refer to it as Sherbro Creole. And on the maternal side, the name was Sherbro, which is a typical Timni name in the region. But he would completely distinguish himself from any Timni ancestry. He didn't want to be labeled as Timni. He said he wasn't Timni, he was Mende, Sherbro, and Creole. So his way of separating himself from Timni identity was really due to the conflict of autochthony that I have just said. Now, how do you analyze such a case? That's the question. What do you do with that? I think the main issue when thinking about a case like this is also what's available in the literature. Literature on ethnicity has focused a lot on boundaries and on identity politics. Since the 1990s, in the African context, the literature has been focusing on identity politics so much that we cannot see ethnic identities differently from essentialization. It's basically a way to achieve power and to navigate within politics. But I think what this literature has been missing is that political positioning can be very different from social positioning and daily life, and the way people actually use their various categories of identification. But of course, there is this looming question in anthropology of essentialization. So we're walking the thin line here between instrumentalist or constructivist approaches, that everything is practice and social practice, but aspects that are also due to ascription. I mean, people refer to descent, they refer to being initiated. These are ascription, these are ascribed by other people who look at them as well. So we have to take into account these two dimensions in order to be accurate. So how do you deal with this when people actually use many of these categories? So my way out of this was to look at linguistic theory, and particularly theory on registers and processes of enregistrement, by which various codes or signs coming from different ethnic registers are becoming part of another category of practice. So it's the fact that Sherbro identity over years has encoded various ethnic registers as its own. It's not experienced by people as mutually exclusive. It's not experienced as code switching. It's experienced as multiplicity. And I think that's very important, despite that it's not code switching. It's the fact that social practice is flexible, but it's normal that it's flexible, right? It's not something that is or with which people experience tensions. And the idea of enregistrement also is the historical process that goes with it. It takes a long time. I mean, with people of Creole background, it has taken over 2 centuries to come to these statements such as Sherbro Creole, Creole Sherbro. It's taken 2 centuries. So process of enregistrement, contrary to code switching, allows us to see this process, or allows us to point this process. Now I've used also the concept of hybridity, which you surely know, which was a way of also looking at the way social practice or daily social practice questions colonial legacy and the so-called pure bounded entities that were created by the colonizers. And by using several codes, several signs as part of one register, it is a very subversive practice regarding like our own understanding of hybridity, or kind of looking again at what hybridity may mean in a contemporary context. But we can talk about that a bit later. How much do I have? 5. Perfect. So let's try to get back to this example I gave you, just to break down the various processes that he refers to, that Mr. Nico refers to. One is the process of, or the transformative idiom, which may be also called ethnic transformation, which is not switching, but really like over a span of years, how somebody can change ethnic identification. So if we look again at Mr. Nico's story, so you can see that, so he was of Mende ancestry, and generation after generation, they have become to define themselves as Sherbro. How is this possible? Because of a very specific pattern to Sherbro society, which is the matrilineal feature. Meaning that when men migrate to settle in a Sherbro community and to practice fishing, and when they marry in a specific community, the children are considered to belong to their mother's lineage. So it's very, this way it's very easy to actually integrate incoming men. It doesn't create competition between lineages. Right? The children will have the same political and land rights as children from local families, right? So these specific patterns also allows people to turn it to their advantage, because most of the other groups are patrilineal. So it's easy to say, I'm Sherbro from my mother on my mother's side, but I'm also Mende or Timni on my father's side. So it's possible to claim both at the same time, and it opens more possibilities for people to actually claim rights in the region where they have settled and in the region where they come from. So there is an expression in Creole that says this. It's adonton Sherbro. So you can see it's the turn, right? It's the transformation of the word to turn in English. Adonton Sherbro, which means I have become Sherbro now. It's different from mina Sherbro, I am Sherbro. No, I have turned Sherbro means I have made the effort to accept the various conditions that were put or placed onto me to become part of the group. Meaning marriage, usually marriage, fishing, and then initiation in the local society, into people. If somebody doesn't want to initiate, it's fine, but then the children will be initiated. And this means that they shifting from the authority of their father to the authority of the Sherbro matrilineage, right? It's a matter of authority over the child. So it's interestingly, it's something that has been identified in previous literature, but people, like I'm thinking about authors working on Guinea, but they have always described that as something of the past, something that had disappeared, something that didn't exist anymore, that had been subsumed under the wider logics of ethnic politics. But in Sierra Leone, if you look at the way people actually practice this way of integrating into local communities, it's very common, extremely common, actually. And now the other, so this is what happened to Mr. Nico's ancestors. And the other process he refers to is this aspect of creolization, becoming Creole via socialization, education, being raised in a Creole family or according to Creole ways. So creolize is a verb in Creole. Not creolize, creolize. So he just became like a true Creole. There are specific signs that are associated with this, which are part of education, socialization, speaking English, being usually secondary school educated. But the most important thing here is that members of other ethnic groups coming from usually other regions to be raised in a Creole family will become fully assimilated into the Creole group. which is not the case for Sherbros here, because both groups have interacted in the region for so long that they have the same family name. They consider themselves as they call the Creole cousinhood, which is a mode of identifying your family members across the region. Creole is their native language, but Sherbro was kind of use the Creole register to claim more social status, usually, especially in small fishing villages. Meaning they might use dress, accent, etc., to claim that they are Creole in certain situations. So again, they claim to be Creole without switching, and they consider to be Creole or to Creole to be part of Sherbro identity due to this long-term context. So perhaps just as a conclusion, I think, so I've tried to kind of sketch the various processes I have looked at, but I think that basically you're here in a frontier zone in which there have been a lot of population contacts over 2-3 centuries and even prior to that. And there are a lot of those frontier zones on the African continent, right? And I think we also have to look at the various ways people claim ethnic identities, the way people switch, they shift, and how flexible this might still be, and might not still only be relevant for the pre-colonial period, which has often been the claim by historians of Africa. Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our wonderful, wonderful speaker, Anaïs Ménard. She's bringing us to history, to the entanglements of history, colonial history, but also the history of slavery and its aftermaths. Why do people form identities the way they do? What are some of the historical, political, economic, survivalist, for that matter, imperatives that make us understand certain ways of group formation, such as, you know, the Sherbro did or do in Sierra Leone. But anyway, this is not, you know, something that I can dwell on that much. That's why we brought Dominic Sonda, who's very, very much familiar with the territory in so many ways, who's going to take us further with this discussion. Thank you, my dear sister. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sandile, and thank you so much, Anaïs, for this amazing presentation. I'm familiar, I'm not familiar. I do not know Sierra Leone. There was a time, like a few years back, I don't know if some of my colleagues remember, but my new project was about Sierra Leone, and then I went back to Benin, but yeah, I almost, but I want to say, you know, and I'm not going to be too long, like in this reaction, but I feel, and I will repeat it a few times, I feel very at home in your ethnography. And I feel at home not because I know Sierra Leone, but first I think because I kind of understand like the anthropological language that you're speaking. And I was looking at your biography, you know, I was very curious. I was like, oh, this Anaïs, I don't know her. She sounds like it's a French name, but I don't know her. And who is she? And I look a bit at your trajectory, and I saw probably like a lot of like social anthropology, French social anthropology. I saw also British social anthropology, and I think that's also resonate with me in many ways. The book also tackles really brilliantly like one of the more classical questions in for Africanist anthropology, and beyond, a very classical question of the relationship between what you call landlord and versus strangers, but you know, in French we can say maître de la terre, and you know, and étranger, local people and that master the land, sometimes with connection to spirits, etc., and people that are newcomers to the land and create new lives. there's one of my favorite author when I was starting anthropology was Michel Izard, the author of Jean de la Terre, Jean de Pouvoir, that is actually writing about Burkina Faso. And that's a fascinating study about how layered like those relationships can be, you know, like there's a couple of like, you know, there's a pair of like landlords and then foreigners that is replaced by another one, and it's kind of the texture of the society is like it's just made of all of those yeah, those kind of like binaries that have very important political implication. And I know you don't cite him, but you cite a lot of work on the topic. It's also, I said, it's a very typical classical question in West Africa for like the study of West Africa, but it's also, you know, has inspired a lot of comparison, for example, with like the Polynesian island and the idea of like the stranger king. Like it's not always that the foreigners are the less powerful sometimes, and not just in the context of like European colonization. The stranger come with an aura that allow them to take over, especially in context of kingship and sacred kingship. So it's a fascinating register, and I think you bring like a new chapter to this like history of anthropology. But also, you know, there's like you challenge a lot of the history, the historiography of West Africa, and also the anthropology of West Africa concerning this question, as you said very well, as well, you know, the question of you know, of ethnic boundaries that have been so central to the understanding of the African continent, and then beyond West Africa. And you said, like, I think you mentioned it was like a central question for the last 30 years, but like it has been a question for, and that's appear in your book also, it's been very central to the history of colonization with, you know, in the French Empire with, for example, like General Gallieni and the Politique des Races, that has, you know, among others, like funded the doctrine of, that was, you know, kind of, you know, using the divide and conquer methods, you know, to solidify. And as I think we had a conversation also with you, Sandile, before, and of course it's also something that is found like under like the Raj, the colonial India, with like the solidification of castes that of course have like really important impacts and long-lasting impacts. So but so you challenge like the like ideas around ethnic I think boundaries in a very meaningful way, and the book is fascinating in the way that it's first, it's like, I must say also, it's like that frontier space, that amazingly interesting and fascinating space of Sierra Leone, with like the like return of former slaves. That's from that Creole, and that exemplifies something that I'm going to touch on later, but like a lot of the coastal identities that are formed on the Atlantic coast of Africa. And then like the way like you're framing, so first the space that is amazing and fascinating, and you know, that's also why I was like, I want a piece of that complexity. But also, of course, the literature and the kind of framework that you use to approach it, and we've seen here like the diverse and like fascinating you know, literature that you use, like from linguistic theory to the question of hybridization and creolization that are so fascinating. And then I love also like you know, your powerful use of singular trajectories and individual examples. Like you, like I think it's a brilliant way to enter like the book with Mr. John Nicol. That is an amazing. I think it's very difficult to have a reader understand what it means to be this and that, without like having like the example of like a personal history and that what I look like. So I like the writing, I think is very fascinating, and I'm very attached to that because, of course, this is also something that I'm thinking myself. You know, this is very easy to say, challenge categories, but it's something else to implement another form of ethnographic writing and to overcome the challenge that are like not only the legacies of our discipline, but also not just like in our language, in the way we speak, and in the kind of the kind of like, I don't know, I feel like essentializing distortion that is like embedded in the way we write about others. So again, I want to repeat, I feel very at home in your book. And I feel also at home in your book in a very aspirational way. And not just because of maybe shared ancestors, but also about like where we are going, right? And the program. What's the plan? What's the plan to study Africa, and what's the vision? I feel it's your work is in that way. I think it's also close to my own preoccupation about the necessity also to understand Africa from its coast, not from what's solid about it, not from like the what it means to be like this and that. And sure, you do it in a way. Your book is emerged also from the desire to understand what it means to be Sherbro, for example. But it's also like dwell and situate itself in a place that is multiple and complex, and there's a desire to embrace it and to really like face it in a way that is very, very full and very very, very important, without desire to reduce or to like simplify what it means to have diverse identity. So I think it's a very important direction, like to situate ourselves in those spaces, to be very intentional. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't like study like all of Africa. It means that everywhere, even in, and you said, copied up a lot, like the frontiers are not just on the coast. The frontiers are not at the borders. The frontiers are also at the interstices between groups. And it's more a methodological issue than just a location issue. So I think that's a very important point. And you're bringing also like the question of hybridization and also creolization, not only because you have actually a population of Creole in Sierra Leone, but also because it makes sense to understand what it means. And of course, this is something that we just starting to discuss it before the seminar, but this is something that I see more and more in African studies, like the desire to bring like notion and concept that have been used to understand Caribbean islands or the Indian Ocean to the study of Africa. And I think it's very important. So I feel also at home with your book, because as not a West African, but an African that is working in Madagascar, in a place where it's very common to become an ethnic identity. It's very normal to have like multiple identities, and in the same way, and that's been anthropologists of Madagascar and historians of Madagascar have been discussing that for decades. There's a lot of books called like Becoming Man, or or challenging the identity or the essence of being of a certain ethnic identity. Like my advisor on his blog was writing a lot about like the fact that in a very cognatic, and sorry for the jargon, but in a place where you can decide your identity between like all of your 4 ancestors or 8 grandparents, you actually become what you are when you become buried in a certain tomb. So there's an idea that you're not determined at birth, but you are becoming what you are. And that's something that is very present in Madagascar, like the inscription and the ethnic and the ethnic belonging. So it's valid for the family, but it's also valid for the ethnic group. You become what you are, like, you know, through rituals, through also sometimes through burials. And there's also, like, you know, just also to give also other examples, it's like fascinating ethnography by Rita Astuti that is working on the western coast of Madagascar, and that's shown that, like, the vase population, in the vase population that she has studied, you become by performing. So you become fishermen. If you that's because you fish that you are vase. It's not because of ancestry or of tomb. It's because of what you do. So I think I feel very at home also because of that. No, because, you know, not everybody is feeling necessarily at home. There's a moment to ask questions, to maybe, like, you know, differences. Okay, so first, like, my first question is one that is inspired by something that you said about what you started with, like, people do not talk about, are not interested in talking about war. So I read Marianne Firm, The Underneath of Thing. My dissertation was on secrecy, so I was very interested in her work. And Marianne Firm has written that fabulous book on secret and in a very ontological way in Sierra Leone. I've also read about Liberia, Rosalind Shaw, that is like showing that although people don't want to talk about Atlantic slavery, it's everywhere in the landscape and through the spirits, for example. So, and also I know from reading, like, a lot of people like in the Caribbean working on colonization, that colonization is sometimes a mask to, like, some conflict, tension, and hierarchy. So what is this, in this situation? What is colonization the mask of? And I also know, because I read about Poro, so I know that that's not that. Yeah, there's a lot of matter of secrecy in that era. This will be my first question. A second question is maybe, like, to invite you also to compare, like, this very, like, Western African case to, like, a more, like, broader African context, and maybe to South Africa. So of course you discuss, like, this importance of the conversation around autochthony. Here there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of ethnographic work around indigeneity. So could you, and I know that you probably have thought on that, but I would invite you to maybe to reflect on, like, what are those different concepts and why they are not the same, and how they are also used differently as like, politically as well. And my the last one would be maybe about, like, you're writing your European anthropologist, you publish this book that's called Integrating Strangers with a publisher that is the Europeans. So of course I read it as, you know, as a challenge, right? Integrating strangers in a context where, like, everything is like, xenophobia is so important, and just using French, in French we say intégrer, it's the same as integrate, but it's two forms. You can integrate somebody, or you can ask people to integrate themselves, and that's s'intégrer, and that's mostly the way it's used, you know. So every stranger, every foreigner in France, for example, is asked to integrate themselves. So, like, in, like, showing us, like, a society that is so much legacy of violence, that is succeeding in ways that are so interesting in integrating strangers. Are you asking us also to reverse the gaze and to interrogate why we can't integrate, like, foreigners in that's it. I see that he's like that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We are at the book launch of Integrating Strangers, Sherbro Identity and the Politics of Reciprocity along the Sierra Leonean, oh my God, Leonean Coast. So this is with Anaïs Ménard, who is the author of the book, where the Humor Institute for Humanities in Africa. Thank you again for being with us physically, and those who are with us online. So she'll answer the questions that Dominic has posed But if there's a question or two from the floor, would you prefer to start with Dominic? I know she has asked a mouthful, but you're a scholar, you're used to other practices of condensing things. So if anybody maybe wants to pose a question in brief, Amina, go for it so that so maybe we can have two questions. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Nice for the presentation. And I'm so happy that the book is open access and so it's very at hand. I was wondering if you could perhaps speak to the idea of the Liberia-Sierra Leone border and whether that came across in your ethnography or in the writing, or the idea of the constructed identity and perhaps what differentiates.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? So that I don't abuse this platform. Okay, let me just add one tiny question. It has to do with the fact that you had pains in suggesting that the dominant understanding of ethnicity as a creation of the the colonizer is what we are sort of writing against, or trying to writing against. Let me be as strong as that. But there's a certain school of thought, or some schools of thought, that would suggest that the argument is not necessarily about the creation, but how the colonial project abuses so that the ethnic identities that exist are polarized, are politically polarized, so that they serve the thesis, the doctrine of divide and rule. So your intervention, I would imagine, is happening against that background. So thank you so much. Over to you, Anaïs.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments. Very rich questions, so I'll try to answer them efficiently. Let's say. So I start with the last one, actually, on the ethnicity as a creation of the colonizer. So I mean, this discussion on ethnicity, I mean, is fundamental, right? In anthropology, it has been like books. It has filled books and books and books. I think we've come now to kind of a consensual understanding of pre-existing, perhaps more flexible pre-colonial ethnic identities that were somehow in different ways in different countries instrumentalized by the colonizer, polarized in certain colonial hierarchies, which is the case in Sierra Leone. I mean, Creole identity was really put as the kind of example that others should follow because they were British educated, in English, had British names, etc. So they were viewed as people who were supposed to spread the gospel to other indigenous Africans. So, of course, each country has had its own history with regard to the creation of colonial hierarchies. But people have been very inventive in playing with this. It has been an imposition, but it has been an imposition that had its flaws in the sense that people could also, according to their own interests, navigate certain identities and certain codes in colonial society. And that's what also my historical part refers to, in the sense that it was of the utmost interest of Sherbro populations being in close contact with liberated Africans to marry with them and access certain assets, right? That would allow them to navigate colonial societies in a much better way. So, of course, there is this question of agency that we should not forget when looking at historical or processes by which ethnic boundaries are navigated. So I think that's a kind of consensual view on that. But now I think that really the problematic focus for the past 30 years has been identity politics. It has been useful in understanding how politics works, but it has not been useful in explaining how people experience these categories in daily life. I think that's the tension, really, and that's the I'm trying to address. Now, there is this on this slide. So I talk about the process of enregistrement. I think it's important to keep in mind that when I chose to use this concept of register and enregistrement, my idea was that enregistrement can be very different from one region to the next. And hybridity can be very different from one region to the next. It's a global concept that can allow us to deal with specific cases. But if you look at Sherbro identity further down the coast, people may not claim Creole identity at all. They will claim that they are Mende speaking, that they practice the Mende version of Poro, which is the initiation society. So it can differ. So it is about Sherbro identity in this region and about historical processes in this region. And then hybridity may look very different in another one. So that's why I think linguistic theory helped me to think about those boundaries. Now, what is creolization the mask of? I think it's a very interesting, I think we should write a paper on that. It's a very interesting question in the sense that, I mean, if you look at a processes like this, I don't on Sherbro, what is this man telling us about? He says, so he had 2 children born Sherbro. And he said, when I came here, I did not think I would join one day because I was already part of the Oje, which is another society. But I saw my friends who were members telling me not to work here or there, not to pass here or there, right? There are certain community rules that exclude people, right? And unless you accept certain rules to play along the social game, I would say, you are excluded. So it's not only a matter of choice. It's also a matter of being obligated in order to have a livelihood, in order to have access to land. You know, it's not a smooth process. That's what I mean. For some people, it may be smooth, but for some people, it may be experienced as a form of violence, right? Why should I become part of Poro? I don't want to, right? I don't want to be initiated, caught by the devil, and spend 3 months, now it's about 2 to 3 weeks in the Poro grove. So it is a violent process. An example I can take that comes to my mind right now is an example of one of my contacts in a locality called Sussex. So he was raised by his maternal uncle in Sussex. And he had his dad and his brothers living in a Timini village further south. So when I asked him about him becoming a Poro man, so we say in Creole, Soko man, I said, will you become a Soko man one day? He said, well, I don't want to initiate here. I want to initiate there with my dad at the Timni Poro. I feel more at ease there. I want to be with my brothers. I want to be part of the same cohort. I said, okay. And then it happened that he was caught by the devil in the next initiation. So his maternal uncle basically took the decision of initiating him there and of him forcefully kind of becoming Sherbro, right? So, and of course, when he went out of the society, he said, well, now I'm a Soko man, I'm happy about that, etc. But if you think about the process and about what he had told me beforehand, it is a violent process. It is a way by which people are also coerced. So I think creolization is also the mask for processes that may be presented as smooth, let's say a few weeks, a few months, a few years afterwards.
Right.
But that on the spot were actually experienced as a form of coercion. Yeah, about the broader West African context and autochthony. So I think that my idea with the book was to go beyond autochthony discourses as they analyzed at the political level, and to try to go into the social processes that lag behind. So let's go back to the map. So you can see that the peninsula is quite small compared to the rest of Sierra. It's a small region. And it's a region that was under direct rule. And the rest of the country that is now Sierra Leone was under British protectorate. So there was this classic division that is, conceptualized by Mamdani as urban citizen versus rural subjects, right? So, of course, the indigenous populations that lived in the colony had this kind of unknown status. They were not urban citizens, they were not Creoles, but at the same time, they did not have the type of rights based on indigeneity that other groups could have in the protectorate. And this is still the case today because there is no collective right to land in this area as compared to the rest of Sierra Leone and what used to be the protectorate. So Sherbro as a group, as a collective formation, cannot claim collective rights to land. It's only state land or private property. So in this configuration, autochthony becomes a way to claim indigenous rights and to claim equal rights as people who live in the rest of Sierra Leone, and to say, well, we are an indigenous group too, and we should have collective rights as an indigenous group. So this is the situation in the region. But I think that the fact of going a bit beyond autochthony at the political level, that could apply to many instances in West Africa, and try to really dig into the long-term relations between groups in order to understand why it occurs at this specific time, and what are the dynamics that led to that. Because today, if you look also at the way people who migrate talk about the peninsula, and they rightly say, well, this is a land for everybody. This is a land where everybody has equal rights. There are no collective rights to land here, so I can buy my property here. It's not Sherbro. No, it's if I have money and I can buy land, then I buy land. So, and it's right. And they can do that. And so they use this opportunity. So again, it's also about looking at those long-term dynamics that kind of lead to those kind of polarized discourses to occur. And yes, so about s'intégrer and intégrer, I think I touched a bit on that when talking about coercion. You have to apologize my lack of knowledge on the South African context specifically, because it's my first time in South Africa, and so I wouldn't be able to expand on this specific case. But I think that there are two levels on which we can see that, and those are, I suppose, I mean, to me, in my understanding, those are mainly about timelines, right? If we look at, at what the situation is in this region in Sierra Leone at the moment, we could talk about s'intégrer in the sense that what autochthonous people population would really like is that Timni-speaking populations accept to play the game, but they don't want to because they have other interests, right? They want to have equal access to land, etc. But if you look at long-term dynamics, then the picture becomes very different, because everyone in each family can actually say, well, my granddad is Timni, my father had Timni roots, my father had Mende roots, my mother came here. So it's extremely diverse. And if we look at the way people discuss this openly, which is possible in Sherbro society to discuss this ancestry openly, then I would talk about intégrer, which is a bit different. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We've got a few minutes left before we call it a day. As my sister Amina said already, this book is available online for free. And thank you so much, to you and the publishers and the agreements. So if you go to the website Berghen, I don't know how to pronounce this, berghenbooks.com. It's BERGHAHAN books. Oh, excellent! There we go. There it is. So yeah, so it's open access, so everybody can download this book and enjoy it and probe it, critique it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah. Maybe we can take one last question from my sister from the DRC. Am I right? Thank you so much, my sister. I'm excited to see you. Go ahead. You know, you're doing a fantastic project on on Congo and migration.
No, I don't have a question. I really enjoyed everything, and thank you for so much for the comment. But I was thinking for the two identities, so just comparing, the fluidity and all that. So thinking about the colonial and post-colonial and post-colonial context. The two that kept coming into my mind to compare with the Sherbro and the other one, unfortunately, I don't think I'm about to check for the concept. I saw the Hutu and Tutsi too, and how, what's the way, and how at some point you could accumulate wealth, and like particularly cows, and then you become, from Hutu identity. Yeah. But today, you don't hear that anymore. I think we still get richer because that's excellent rich person who a lot of cows, and for a most. But then today, everything that happened since at least the late 50s, you don't hear any who trying to become a kids. Maybe they get rich, becoming rich, accumulating wealth, but they still want to be identified as such because it was a prestigious identity then. So I wanted to chat to you about how things have changed in regard to this identity in maybe most contemporary context.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our book launch for today. Integrating Strangers by our guest, Anaïs, Ménard, and our discussant, lovely discussant here, Dominic Solder. So thank you so much to all the colleagues at Human, particularly Joy, Tabitha, and of course, Divine, our boss, who makes sure that we keep going here. And the senior colleagues and everybody really who at UCT helps us keep this forum going. This forum is not for any one of us, but it is for all of us. It doesn't just belong to UCT, but it belongs to a world that believes in freedom of speech, decoloniality, feminist thought, all the ideas that have got the potential to turn this world on its ugly head. So thank you so much. This is the last session for the term, for the quarter. Yeah, I've not been at university for a long time, so I'm forgetting these things. Yeah. So this is the last one, but we're coming back on May 8th. We'll have Megan Shoritz, a vibrant novelist from Cape Town, playwright. She'll be talking to us about her novel, Lost Property. So thank you so much. And then Ataya is also coming, which is a seminar series that my dear sister moderates. It's also coming when we come back from back. 21 March this week is Human Rights Day. This is based, of course, historically on the tragedy of Sharpeville. Where people in South Africa marching for their human rights were murdered by a brutal apartheid state. So we shouldn't forget that as we move on with our lives and enjoying whatever goodies that democracy and freedom, bring to us. So thank you very much. Please follow us on all media, social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and what have you. So thank you again, and good afternoon. That's fantastic. That was brilliant.